And we're live. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are now day 92 since October 7th. That's 92 days of bloodshed in a 100-year-long conflict. So while we've had 92 very tragic days, that's not where it started. But a more important question is, where does it end? How do we move forward? What can we all do to contribute to a more peaceful resolution? So today we have on our usual Kyle Hagan. He's going to give us some updates on the situation. He's going to also talk to us a little bit about misinformation. And we have a new guest today, Sam Bland, who I recently met. He'll share a little bit about himself. And yeah, I'm just very, very excited to have you on the program, Sam, for the first time. And Tal, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
We will have some opportunity to take some questions from the audience, and maybe we'll see how it goes. We'll drop a link and we'll do a call-in show and people can hop on. Those viewing, let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. And again, thank you for joining us. So, Tal, mind giving us some updates on the situation? What's going on?
Yeah, so there's a few things in terms of backstory that we need to understand. Last week, South Africa has essentially submitted claims against the state of Israel as a state that it is committing the crime of genocide against Gaza based on the Genocide Convention of 1948. Currently, the state of Israel is actually going to go and defend itself, which is actually quite surprising to me that it's actually playing along, so to speak, because in the past it has simply just said, we're not playing along, we're not doing anything you want. But this is going to happen at the International Court of Justice, which is different than the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court prosecutes individuals, while the International Court of Justice prosecutes countries. So right now, you'll see a lot of things currently in the media where they're trying to talk about what exactly was the allegations against the state of Israel regarding intent. I did a thread on this on Twitter. If anyone is interested, they can look. But essentially, I think it's important, the backstory, the Genocide Convention is that it's not about statistics on the population or how many you're killing or indiscriminate bombings or starvation or stuff like this. The only thing that matters in the Genocide Convention that can actually prosecute someone or a country or a people for the crime of committing a genocide is intent. So, for example, if an individual is responsible for the deaths of even 100,000 people, but he did so because he was trying to force the population to a ceasefire or to surrender or something else, and this is what his intentions, then that is not a genocide. But even if only 100 people or only 50 people were killed, but the intentions of that individual was outright saying, we are going to eradicate these people, eradicate them and destroy them, that would then be the crime of genocide. So it's important to understand that when we're looking at whether or not the allegations by South Africa are legitimate or not, it's not about looking at the numbers, it's about looking at the what is said by Israeli figures. And it also doesn't really, so I would more debate about this, that it's less important what some commentator says and more important to look at the people who are actually in the war cabinet, the people who are actually making the decisions regarding what happens in Gaza and looking at what they have to say. And so that's something important I think that everyone should do, to look at exactly what the allegations are and what Israel has said in response. Other than that, we know that a few days ago there was a horrific terror attack in Iran that left I think it was 88 or 89 people dead on the day of the anniversary of forgot exactly how you say his name, Khamenei,
Soleimani.
Soleimani.
So Soleimani's death. There were a lot of allegations about who was responsible. 2 days later, a cell connected to ISIS allegedly took responsibility. However, today Hezbollah has retaliated against the state of Israel, and not as a proxy of Iran for what occurred in Iran, but actually for the death of a senior Hamas official who was assassinated by the state of Israel. I think allegedly, or either we took it on purpose, I don't even remember, but it's quite obvious who was responsible. A few days ago in Beirut, like in the actual center of Lebanon. And so this was one of their retaliations today. They fired, I think it was 60 to 80 missiles at Israel. A lot of them were centered around Har Dov, Har Meron, which is, according to them, a intelligence hub of the Air Force and how they actually conduct their operations against Syria and Lebanon regarding their Air Force. And so they were essentially attacking that. It was a pretty big barrage, one of the biggest that we've seen in a while since the beginning of the war. Also regarding what's actually happening in Gaza, there hasn't been much change regarding the actual change in situation. We know that currently the IDF is shifting from their first phase to the second phase. They're starting to pull out a lot of their reservists. It's important to understand that pulling out the reservists doesn't really have to indicate that they're losing the war, they're not doing well. You could make that argument, but it's important to understand that a reservist costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to keep individuals in the army who aren't part of their mandatory force. For example, I know of individuals who are getting roughly 300 shekels a day for staying in the army. This is instead of going to work. This is instead of providing for their families. While a regular soldier in the military makes roughly 1,200 shekels a month. So you can understand that essentially upkeeping a
which
reservist,
is around $300 for those.
Exactly. So understanding that upkeeping a regular soldier for an entire month is cheaper than a reservist for just 3-4 days. And that doesn't even take into account that when that reservist is fighting in Gaza, he's not making money. He's not bringing in money to the economy by working at his job. So it makes sense that, you can't go on forever where you have this massive force of the reservists. I mean, they roughly, I think it was like 340,000 reservists were brought up. That's a lot of people to take out of the economy. And so they're slowly removing all these people from the fighting force, and they're shifting how they're doing their fighting currently in Gaza. And so that's currently the update of where we are. Specifics I can probably give later. I need to make sure that what I'm looking at is factual, but that's currently where we are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tal. Sam, feel free to introduce yourself and just share your thoughts. And guys, you might notice my mouth is a little bit blue. I take this nootropic. For those who don't know, nootropics are supplements you can take to make you sharper, more focused. So this one is called, they're not sponsoring me, so don't think I'm saying it because they're sponsoring me. I just want you to know why my mouth is blue. It's called Blue Canatine. It has methylene blue, a little caffeine, a little nicotine, and CBD. Interesting blend. It works. That's why I'm so sharp, if you haven't noticed. But anyways, yeah, Sam, all you.
Thank you. Adar, well, it's a pleasure to be here, guys, and meet both of you. Obviously, Adar and I are recent new friends. I'm Palestinian American, born and raised in Chicago. I have family in the West Bank stretching back for centuries, and my DNA actually is connected to the ancient Egyptians and Canaanites. So definitely in the region for a very, very long time, and have a lot of thoughts, obviously, a lot of family. My dad is one of 10. My mom is one of 7. I have over 60 first cousins. We own about 200 dunams of olive trees, almond trees, and, lived there, or, probably a couple times over the last 40 years. Would spend every summer there. So I've seen all the beauty of it, and I've seen also all the heartache as well. So, obviously want to provide more of an insight from Palestinian sides, especially from our family, who is trying to be more involved, I guess, at this point. It's one of those types of things where we have been spread out all around the world. My father came to this country for a better life for us, and we need to give back in that sense. And so that's why a lot of us are really stepping up our advocacy work at this point. So.
Yep. Thank you, Sam. And we are starting to work on some projects together. We're building a little group out here in LA that will also connect to groups of people living on the land. We'll probably do another stream just to talk about that and really, really go deep. I want to kind of open up the conversation around genocide. I feel like it's one that there's just a lot of discussion, a lot of confusion. So I kind of want to go deep into that. Real quick, we have Amon 1919 is saying Adar is a Zionist. Watch out. Well, Ma, I'll challenge you to tell me how you define Zionist, and then I'll tell you if I would consider myself a Zionist based on that definition. Genocide. So, Tal, as you mentioned, genocide is about intent, right? So if you intend to destroy a population, that is genocide. or at least attempt to genocide. What we're seeing now in Gaza is massive amounts of civilian casualties, but it's collateral damage, right? It's a different category because it's not intentional. It's a result of whatever military or strategic gain they're trying to achieve. But here's where things get tricky.
It also can be intentional, by the way. That's the thing. That's why it's really hard in terms of the legality of.
Wait, what could be intentional?
You could intentionally be killing civilians, but if they're not for the intent of destroying the population in whole or in part, then you wouldn't be. That it's one of the issues with international law that I think that, I remember when I did my analysis on terrorism, like the understanding the background behind terrorism and how it formed. So I decided to actually start understand international law and reading into it, and it became a lot more complex as I went on. Like there are sometimes it sounds dumb, like if you're intentionally killing a population, then it's genocide or it goes, but it isn't.
Right.
And so it's one of the reasons that it's surprising that this is being brought to a case, because it's very hard to prove this. I mean, it was only proven once, and I think that in a case, and that was against one individual it was Darfur, I think, in the case with Rwanda.
Right. Yeah.
For example, with the Serb, what happened in the other case that I have in my analysis, he wasn't charged with genocide. It's very, very difficult to charge someone with a crime.
So to that point, it's almost like we're having a debate over, is there intent? And intent certainly matters, right? That's why, like in criminal justice, there's difference between first-degree murder and manslaughter. But what we know for certain, is that you have massive civilian casualties as collateral damage. And the question is, how much collateral damage should the world be able to accept as okay or normal? I think there's this old way at looking at war. It's like, look, when there's war, civilians are going to die. It's just part of war. And it's very easy to just like push away any critique of collateral damage. It's like, look, that's the consequence of war. But we need to, the way we should evolve as a species is not one where we could just accept so much death and destruction because it's for military gain or strategic gain. In order to justify something like this, you need to really prove that there is absolutely no other option and that you've tried all other options. And I think this is really what the conversation needs to be about. It's not genocide, but the moral implications are not, I'm not going to say they're not different. They certainly are, but to think that because it's not genocide, therefore it's okay, I just don't think that's a moral position, right? A strong moral position. It's not genocide, but can we justify this amount of death and destruction when there are potentially other more diplomatic means of solving it, right? So I think this is personally how I'd like to explore it, but I do want to hear both of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, if I can kind of step in here, I mean, how many categories do we have to hit for it to be considered genocide in the end of the day, right? I did a sort of panel before, and we talked about this. It was early on in October, when it was still kind of iffy and kind of in the gray area. But there are 10 characteristics to genocide, right? And does that mean if you satisfy 5 of those characteristics, does that make it a genocide? What is the line that we want to cross here, right? So stage 1, classification, people are divided into us versus them. Well, that's sort of already happened, correct? So that's 1 out of 10, excuse me. Symbolization, I don't see that symbolized, even though there has been some reports of people saying, well, the ID cards symbolize that, but everybody has an ID card, so that one's a little difficult. It's not the same thing as putting a yellow Jewish star on somebody or symbolizing them in a certain way. So I would say that doesn't necessarily count because there hasn't been symbolization. The third is discrimination, right? A law or cultural power that excludes groups from civil rights, segregation, or apartheid laws, denial of voting rights, etc. We have that, right? Everybody in the West Bank doesn't have any way to vote for anything that actually changes their lives. Dehumanization. One group denies the humanity of another. Members of them are equated as animals, vermin, insects, or diseases. Well, there's enough rhetoric that we have seen from Israeli officials that have said all those things. Fifth, organization. Genocide is always organized. Now, there are reports, and I haven't been able to corroborate these, and I don't know if you guys have been as well, and Tal, I'd be interested in hearing what you're saying, but the algorithms are obviously focusing and showing you what you want to see, right? And so we're seeing reports that Israeli soldiers are marching Palestinians and shooting them, killing them, and there's more than one report that's saying that. So I don't know how to corroborate that because there's a complete media blackout for the most part to know what exactly is going on in the fog of war, as they call it, right? But besides that, maybe organization, again, nebulous. We don't know, yes or no. Number 6, polarization. Hate groups broadcast polarizing propaganda. Well, again, we can check that box off. I would say both Hamas and Israeli officials, especially the right-wing government in Israel, is sort of creating polarizing propaganda. 7, preparation. Victims are identified and separated out because of their ethnic, original, religious identity. Again, they are separated, so you can kind of say that box gets ticked. 8, persecution, forced displacement, ghettos, concentration camps. Again, that's up for question. 9, extermination. If the reports are true, God forbid, that would be one of the final points. And then 10, denial. The perpetrators deny that they committed any crimes. So again, it's very much okay. How many boxes of those do we tick? Do we tick 5? Do we tick 6? Do we tick 4? And I have a really close Jewish friend who's one of my from Chicago as well, and he said, it may not be genocide, but it's genocide adjacent. What is happening in the West Bank, it may not be apartheid, but it's in the neighborhood of apartheid. So, the semantics is important. A lot of people will say, and I've heard this throughout my whole life, Palestinians don't exist. Palestine has never been a country. Palestine is this, that, and the other. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in a long enough timeline, nothing exists. Not Israel, not Palestine, not Judaism, not Islam, not any of it. But what does exist is our common humanity, and that is the angle, which is why I think Adar and I, get along so well, is because that is the angle that we believe the silent majority of the world really adheres to. It really kind of pushes to it. And sorry, I know I kind of digressed here a little bit, but back to the idea of genocide. What is acceptable? What is acceptable? How many boxes need to be ticked? Are we allowing all the boxes to get ticked? Because with unrestrained allowing, things to happen, and I'm telling, I think a good thing that they're pulling out now, hopefully that will, lessen the pain and suffering that's happening to the poor Gazans and to the people there. But you can look at northern Gaza and it's pretty much decimated. So, even if they didn't go in with the intent of ethnically cleansing, as a byproduct, it is. So
I'm just going to say is that I think that there's also a distinction needs to be made here, that there's the semantics argument, which you're talking about, how it's like, for example, when we talk about the West Bank and the policies in the West Bank, and whether, if it doesn't fit the exact or our known definition of apartheid, but it is essentially apartheid in terms of how it actually ends in practice. So when I'm talking about genocide, I'm mainly talking about in the terms of international law and the Genocide Convention, because that's what's being brought up by South Africa. You can definitely make the argument, and I would make the argument, that there are definitely leaders in the Israeli government who have very much shown intent that they would like a genocide to occur in Gaza, about wiping out Gaza, wiping it off the map. If you say that Gaza should be wiped off the map, that's what you're saying, that you want a genocide to occur. So there's that there's definitely intentions by different Israeli ministers for this. And then there's that side of the coin. And then there's the others, which is the legal arguments regarding the Genocide Convention, which is that it doesn't matter if Ben Gvir says this. What matters is that the people who are actually in the war cabinet, what they're saying, who actually have the decision-making powers. So that's the thing. It's not about that, they're not, or according to this convention, there's the legal argument, which is talking about how these people would be prosecuted. And then there's the not moral argument, but like the tachlis, like the facts on the ground argument of what you could say of what the intentions of these people are. That I think that's just important to understand where I'm coming from when I'm talking about this topic, that there's two different things going on here. I agree with you completely.
And I think there's a much stronger case to make that the intention is actually ethnic cleansing. I think now there's like talk about, getting Palestinians to voluntarily leave. But leaving voluntarily, once your home is destroyed, and and your family members are killed, that still constitutes ethnic cleansing. So um, I think that's probably there's a much stronger case there. But Sam, I really like what you said, because if it's not genocide, it's genocide adjacent, or similar enough, similar moral implications. And I think it's unfortunate how much we kind of get stuck debating terminology rather than, actions. Are these actions moral? Are they productive to our goal? And is there a better approach? And I think that's really how we need to be looking at things. I'm going to bring Justin on. Actually, he told me the other day, I've been saying around the whole time, it's just Justin. Justin, welcome back.
Hi, Adar. Hello, Tal again. And hi, Sam. Nice to meet you. I'm also Palestinian.
Nice to meet you, Justin.
Yeah.
I'd like to actually reference some of the comments here really quickly, because they're kind of funny about the panel being one-sided or whatnot. It's about actually looking at the actual facts, and it's actually looking at what international law says. I just went through 10 different distinctions of genocide, and again, you can tick off multiple boxes of it. What exactly constitutes that? There are definitely war crimes. Okay, that's indisputable.
100%.
So I don't understand how you're saying that's one-sided. We are saying everybody on the panel is saying
it's definitely not one-sided. I can tell you that. I probably disagree.
Yeah.
I think we've had discussions before with Tal. This is probably like my fourth time.
Well,
on the issue of genocide, maybe he's referring to on our definition, maybe, but.
Well,
and I just have a big issue.
Casimir, panel's one-sided, is going to join the panel, so that'll give it another side.
But let me ask. I wanted to ask Tal. Because I came a little late. Yeah. Tal, in your opinion, does genocide, does it have to include killing off people? Or, for example, because I'm looking at genocide. I don't know if you know George Stanton. He's president of Genocide Watch. And his definition of genocide, it doesn't mean just necessarily the actual murder of people. It could also mean things like, for example, making a situation where women can't give birth, like causing the destruction of healthcare systems.
That's one of the definitions of the genocide convention.
And making life so unbearable that people have to leave, like this silly thing that's called voluntary immigration, which is
that's not actually, by the way. That's not. It's interesting. That was brought up in.
That's ethnic cleansing.
Ethnic cleansing.
Well, according to Article 2, according to George Stanton, it's part of the Article 2 of the Conventions and the Preventions and Punishment of Genocide, and he does mention that, and that's why I'm a little.
So what I just against it is that because when I actually looked at, for example, previous cases, ethnic cleansing was brought up, whether or not it can constitute, and that the migration of people on its own does not, as in. If you're making the scene really horrible, it's more about if you, for example, it's specifically why they don't talk about in the actual convention in the article, they don't mention migration of people involuntarily.
I think in 1998 there was a Rome statute in the International Criminal Court that did include that in the Genocide Conventions.
I'd be happy to see it. I'd be happy to add
I'll send it to you.
The analysis.
And it included in this Article 2, it concluded killing members of a group, causing seriously bodily and mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting group condition of life calculated to bring about physical destruction and a whole and a part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group and forcibly transferring children. These were specifically mentioned.
Yeah. But the thing is, and this is what I was saying to Sam regarding the difference between like what you could essentially call genocide based on all these factors, but regarding actually being prosecuted under this convention, none of that matters if you don't have the intent. That's
but we also have other things going on. We can say that soldiers are going around killing people, and which Sam did mention are happening, but we also know that there are negotiations going on right now between the Israeli government and countries such as the new right-wing elected Israeli-friendly government of Argentina, Congo, Rwanda, Chad. I've heard several African countries being basically approached to take Palestinians. So there is a clear. along with this, you have, of course, a overwhelming amount of Israeli public. I think it was something like 86% support. 68 of them extremely support relocating Palestinians, ethnic cleansing, and about another, basically 86% in favor or greater. So, and then, we're not just talking about fringe people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. We're talking about the prime minister himself. The prime minister himself has called for this. He's advocating for this, and he's saying, he admitted, he said the countries are not cooperating with us. And the fact that you have millions of people now on the border of Egypt being pushed there, it's almost as if this war, which, first of all, I didn't call it genocide in the beginning. I said war crimes. I'm very careful when I use terminology. Like, for example,
Same.
I don't call something anti-Semitic until I see this anti-Semitism. Just like I said with war crimes, I said, we're going to say it's war crimes, but I think we've reached the point where it's genocide because there's a clear intent. The Israeli government is not shy about it. The Israeli public is just really not shy about it. There is stuff going on right now that does constitute. We are now at the genocide phase of this war.
I would agree with that, and that's basically where I disagree with a lot of these comments here. I mean, and whoever Ed is absolutely right. The comments, our focus is on damage, not precision. That's intent. There are no civilians. All are legitimate targets. That's intent. So
Yeah.
you can kind of go through all the intentions now. And visualizing Palestine, actually, the website itself is a very, and I'm an investing member in that site because of data. And Tal, I think you love data as well.
I follow the site.
Yeah, and so I scrutinize all the data because I'm a very data oriented person, and I look at what you just said and I agree with it. Like, what is it going to take to get to a prosecution? And even after something, let's say Israel is guilty of genocide, then what happens? What happens?
Well,
You gonna
that's
stop it from doing it.
And this is the big debate. This is the big debate that we predominantly have the luxury to sit like if you remember the Gulf War. The issue of whether or not there's weapons of mass destruction. Well, by the time we found out that there wasn't, we had hundreds of thousands of people dead, millions of people displaced. So in this situation, I'm not more concerned about prosecuting. I do want people to be prosecuted for war crimes, whether they are on the Palestinian side or the Israeli side. But what I'm really concerned about is I don't want to see the damages. I don't want to see the fulfillment of the Nakba while millions of our people are scattered, further displaced. And then, oh, you know what? You're right. It was an attempted genocide. But it's too late. We can't do nothing about it. This is why it's more important that we take action now. And this is why I say I drew the red line that on the Israeli side, in the Israeli public, you're either against this or you're not with us, period. Because I do not want to wait until 50% of Gaza's population is forcibly removed and then decide, hey, you know what? It's time we go to the international court. So the person who responded, who's saying that, what did he say? He said something about, we're talking about not damage. We need to address it now because this is happening right now. This is not something that happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's something that's occurring right now, and it's actually getting worse right now. So the mobilization has to be to prevent it, not to whether or not we're going to prosecute it in 5 years from now.
I also think that the media blackout makes it really difficult for us to ascertain what is going on the ground. A lot of times we have a viewpoint, obviously, from Mutazes of the world and a lot of the Gazan journalists that I follow. I see the destruction, and I forced myself to watch it over the last 3 months. I haven't gotten much sleep. I'm sure as many people on this panel have not as well. But it really is important to kind of decipher what is true and what is not. And it's difficult when there's a media blackout. And in any kind of other scenario, you usually have journalists that are more on the ground and are able to kind of corroborate what is going on. But because of that, and this is not the first time it's happened, Israel always does that. It blacks out any kind of information. And that in and of itself is troubling. It's a problem, right? Because you want to defend yourself. You want to say, okay, then let observers in. And I'm not a fan, obviously, or obviously I denounce all types of violence altogether. I get why Hamas did what they did, and I understand it, but at the same time, I denounce it completely. I will say though, Hamas, for all intents and purposes, has said, bring in observers. Let them see what's going on here. And I think that is a difference in showcasing, when a lot of people say, well, the West Bank's dangerous. And if you ever drive from, Tel Aviv into the West Bank or going from there, you see these huge signs that say, enter at your own risk. Everybody here is dangerous and all that. And And that's that fear, right? That's that fear that's been implemented into people, and why the Israeli public sits there and says, well, I don't mind if all of Gaza is wiped out, but I don't mind if this type of stuff happens. And so we have to be very clear and look at that scenario and say, well, why is this happening? What is the rhetoric that's coming out of each of the camps, and how do we change that? And I think it's incumbent upon Israelis and Adar and such yourself to push the Israeli government and to push that, and then it's up to Justin and people like myself to push the Palestinians as well, because the PA is completely impotent. Hamas hasn't really done much besides create a lot of damage and destruction. I get that they keep putting us back on the world psyche, but at the end of the day, at what cost? At what cost are we being put on the world psyche? And so that is, and I don't really necessarily have a question for that, an answer for that, but I do feel like there needs to be a better way, and that's why I think a lot of us are stepping up our advocacy work to kind of provide that new path forward.
Thank you, Sam. Well said. We're going to bring Casimir on. So Casimir let us know that the panel is one-sided. So let's bring on another side. Welcome.
Yeah, it's one-sided because everybody assumes that international law is a thing that we should adhere to, even though for the past 100 years, the international law has proven to be not only impotent, but protective of regimes that are dictatorial, regimes that deprive people of their basic human dignity and rights. And so, and it's applied selectively on a purely Schmittian friend-enemy distinction, where there's a certain group of people in the world that all the scrutiny applies to, and they have direct enemies that are sitting right next to them, attacking them constantly, and the scrutiny applies only to the one side that gets attacked. And when there's finally a retaliation, when the war becomes reciprocal, suddenly everybody is a humanist that wants to stop the war. But the war starts when you lie about history, when you forget about places like Tzfat, when you forget about places like Kfar Saba, when you forget about places like Kfar Uriah, Ruhama, Hartuv, Hulda, Motza, Poria, Beit Shean, Kfar Malev, Tel Hai, and Metula. I just named you the villages destroyed by Arabs in the 1920s. Before there was any massive, reason to do so. They did so because it is a region where human rights do not exist, did not exist ever, where Jews were killing Arabs, Druze were killing both sides, Arabs were killing Druze, and when one side was more powerful than the other, it would kill the other side. That's the reality on the ground. No one cares about international law, and this is still the case. And this is why this panel, I believe, is one-sided. Now, you cannot take people that for 70 or plus years, whatever it is right now, have been not told about their history, not told about what their ancestors did in the 20s, have a complete victimhood complex to the point where in the last attack on October 7th, just so you realize who they attacked primarily leftist Jews who lived in peaceful communities alongside them, who lived in communities that were built in a desert that was never occupied by anyone else, who did so through ingenuity, through irrigation, for various ways to make desert land economical. You can point at every single settlement. You can look at property maps from the beginning of the previous century, and you will see there was no Arab property there, nor land claims, except maybe some nationalist fascist claims that somebody might want to cite, like blood and soil. But besides that, nothing of the sort. And these people were identified for being members of the Israeli society, even though they were friends of the Arabs living in Gaza, and they were mercilessly genocided. And the only reason they were stopped was because the response of the Israeli military was very immediate and overwhelming, which is, again, not the narrative being spread. And now suddenly, when there's a full-blown war and there's a fog of war, we don't know what's happening on the ground, we suddenly believe the side that performed this genocide against their ideological allies. So why did it occur? Oh, because it's not ideological. It is ethnic. It is ethnic from the other side. And now they're saying, how about we be libertarian about this? Israel, please prove to us that every single bomb that is targeted at a person, that person is in the act of trying to kill someone. that you're demanding that level of justification right now. Some of you don't even demand that. Some of you just demand, oh, don't throw the bomb at all. If there's any civilian nearby, don't throw it. Let the mortar keep firing. So I don't see. So first of all, I don't see recognition of history here. I don't see recognition of the nature of this conflict and what preceded it for 70 years. I don't see any recognition of any system of rights. Like if you were to say to me, all of you are libertarian, and so you believe that any innocent life that is taken is a murder, is a crime, unless that person is actively trying to kill somebody in the moment, that would be the libertarian position. And then you would say, okay, Casimir, what Israel is doing is highly aggressive, innocents are dying, right? I would say, okay, I have a panel of libertarians. None of that exists on the other side. Nobody believes in that. Oh, there's an appeal to international law. Again, where is this international law where the United States bombs Libya, or when Syria fights against the Kurds, or the Kurds fights against Turkey? You know,
So,
Turkey.
Casimir,
What is the international composed of if not?
I think you make a lot of assumptions. You make a lot of assumptions, man. You don't know really a lot of us on this panel. You don't know our history. And in fact, I know the history going back over 3,000 years, when the word Palestine was first used, Philistine, all that type of stuff.
I don't care
My
about
family
that.
goes back for hundreds of, well, you're saying that we don't know the history, and I'm giving you examples of how we know the history. I'm telling you
what was the population of Sfat in the 1500s? You know the history.
Okay,
what was the population of Sfat in the 1500s?
What was the population of Moscow in 1300s? I mean, you're asking arbitrary questions. I can ask you the same thing right now.
It's history that your audience never heard.
Guys, let's.
It is arbitrary.
Let's de-escalate. I'm sure we can find some common ground here, but Casimir, for you, it very much seems like us talking about what Israel is doing wrong without mentioning all the history is somehow problematic. But we need to recognize that there is endless different angles and things we could actually talk about when it comes to the conflict, and you can't cover every topic, every single stream. It's just impossible.
Very true.
So for us to just be here and be able to acknowledge that we think Israel is doing something wrong, or that we could change the conversation, or what the focus is on, I think that's a perfectly legitimate conversation to have. Not everything needs to, like, we just can't give the entire history before talking about it. So we need to understand that,
but to make the assumption that we don't have the history is kind of short-sighted.
I think
no one ever talks about the villages in the 20s.
So I think that's something.
I think they do talk about it.
Some of the names for the first time in the history of this channel.
No, it's not the first time. We've talked about it before. We've mentioned it before.
Justin, guys, we're a lot of people, so if I ask people to quiet down, please. I don't like to be bossy, but it's just going to be people talking all over each other. So, Casimir, this is a good example. You're like, nobody ever talks about the villages in the 20s. That's true, but also many people don't talk about the fact that even before there was any violence against the Zionist movement, Palestinians were displaced through land purchase. Right? They weren't killed, but they were displaced. That's an act of aggression. And now it's not. Hold on. We could make the argument. We can make the argument that violence against a colonizer isn't justified, but again, you're not trying to really go. You didn't mention anywhere that thousands of Palestinians were displaced before violence broke out. Right?
And if I can give you a little bit of a history, my grandfather. Go for it.
So, what Adar just did is he said land purchases were aggressive. And
he said displacement. Displacement. There's a difference between purchases and displacement.
Land purchases were aggressive. And that's true for a minority of the cases. In the majority of the cases, the land purchase was responded to with aggression by people who had no homesteading, no libertarian connection to the land, except a nationalist claim. And I know that because on your channel, you never, and as from the word never, shown the property maps. And if you show the property maps, you will see that the majority of the land purchases, we're generalizing here, right? Because we're not doing a specific court case. We don't look at the specific crime. We're generalizing. So as a generality, Jews were purchasing land that was never occupied by a village, or if the village was there, the village voluntarily sold the land, and then less than 10 years later tried to kill the buyers. When it does that, from my perspective, it loses access to property rights. If the village of Kfar Saba attacked the Arab side, attacked the Jewish village of Kfar Saba, which purchased its land, and got attacked multiple times, it's like every 10 years they were genocided. And then in the final fight in 48, they responded by clearing out their Arabs out of that village. For most of you, and for the popular history on that topic, that village, people from the Arab Kfar Saba can claim that they're displaced illegally, they can claim the Nakba, they can claim that they're victims, and they can demand their land back. And the entire universe, the entire world unites around them and says, from the river to the sea. But they don't have that right from a libertarian's perspective because they committed aggression. Enough of them as a generality. Maybe some individual could say, oh, I was the only one that didn't participate in the attack on the Jewish village. I just watched. And maybe he has the right. And you know,
Kashmir,
fine.
do you know who Herbert Samuels? Do you know who Herbert Samuels is?
Educate me.
Herbert Samuels is the first High Commissioner for Palestine after World War I. He was a very big Zionist from Britain. He also set up the facts on the ground in the first place. My grandfather, under the British Mandate system, was beaten half to death because there was rumors that he had guns in his place. So that was not only, he was not the only person that was beaten to half his death, but most Palestinians were not allowed to have any kind of guns, were not allowed to have anything to protect themselves. And the facts on the ground during Herbert Samuels' first commission in Palestine was to create the facts on the ground to help the Zionist movement in Palestine. So you want to talk about history? Great. I'll talk about the history of what happened after World War I. Let's just start there. And let's talk about anecdotally what my family has gone through generations in the last 100 years. So you can say what you want to say as far as that is concerned and talk about all these villages. I don't disagree with you, by the way. I know all that pain and suffering has happened in the 20s and the 30s, you know, and what has happened beyond that. But at the end of the day, those items have to also be addressed. You want to talk about history? Talk about Herbert Samuels. Talk about the British Mandate. Talk about things that were facts on the ground that created the mess in the first place. There was one bad decision after another.
There is no...
You keep shaking your head. But
I am shaking my hand because I don't care about the British or the Ottomans or anyone else. But you do because you're a statist, most likely, just by the way you talk. You generalize in one direction.
Well, I would say 99% of the population believes in the concept of a nation state. So it's not like that.
Correct. It's an easy assumption. So when I look at the map,
I don't believe in that, by the way. I don't.
You know, there is this statement: people, people without a land,
a land with a people, and land with a people.
Yes. Yes. It's sort of a false statement in one sense because there are many populated villages, but it's also true if you look at the property maps. There were a lot of properties that were established on empty land, on underused land. People came in and started working the land. For example, converting swampland into arable land, which made it highly productive. It required a lot of investment. It required European technology and know-how. And there is, unless you go into a blood and soil type argument, where an entire territory belongs to an ethnic group, which I don't subscribe to, right? Because I'm not a Nazi. Then you don't have any argument against people migrating in. If you call Jewish migrants in the 20s occupiers or colonizers, you have to use the same word for the Arabs that currently go into Europe. But I don't see many people on the left.
But there's a distinction because Zionists didn't just come as refugees to live on the land. They came with a very clear intention to carve out a Jewish state for Jews by Jews, and to think that local populations have been living on that land for generations are just going to be like, yeah, sure, take a Jewish state on land I'm living on. Like, there's no reason to think they would accept that. That would be like us accepting the Romans when they invaded 2,000 years ago, right? So understanding why Zionism was rejected shouldn't be hard to understand.
It was rejected by people who believed that the entire region belongs to Arabs, just like Druze in that region believe the entire region belongs to Druze. And so those people had genocidal intents towards their neighbors. And the only time they didn't genocide, for example, the Arabs didn't genocide the Druze. Why? Because the Druze were hard to genocide. They would escape.
So let me ask, can I ask Casimir something? Casimir, rather than go back in this rabbit hole of history that we can interpret in so many different ways, well, let's look at now. Like, let's go before October 7th and look at, for example, what was happening in the West Bank, where you had cities in Area C, where you had settlers like going on attacks against Palestinians, where you have, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, Muzaffar Yatta was evacuated. 1,200 people were literally forced off the land. This is areas in the West Bank. So if we want to say, let's give you the benefit of the doubt, you're 100% right about the past. But now we have a situation where you have millions of Palestinians that live in an area, and you have Israeli Jews with an Arab population that lives in another part of the area. How does this? What benefit do you see when you have continuing things that's going on in the West Bank, settlements going at an accelerated rate, Palestinians being forced out of Area C, and places like Yatta and it's put into areas surrounded by walls and stuff. So even if that's the case, you cannot. Can you just at least acknowledge that the direction that the country is going in right now is not sustainable?
So I reject any type of situation where there is a group of people that live peacefully in a village, and someone comes in and starts removing those people from that village, even though they didn't do anything, they didn't aggress. And so a lot of the settlers, if you can point to me to a situation where the settlers go in and attack an Arab village.
Muzaffar Yatta, Doma.
I know.
I can give you a whole. You gave me a list. I can give you a list. I can give you a list of 10 villages easily, just like you gave me 10 a list.
So in that perspective, people.
But what I'm saying is, you painted the picture. You painted the picture that this is a retaliation. But what I'm trying to tell you is, 300 Palestinians in 2022 were killed in the West Bank. We're about 300 and 400 since October 7th in the West Bank. These are areas that have nothing to do with Gaza. And yet this is happening right now. So do you understand that this situation is something? No, I'm just telling you that this is something that's gone.
To your first one, you switched to a second one.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So you introduced a case where Jewish villagers were attacking Arab villagers, and I just conceded to that. If there is a case where a Jewish village attacks an Arab village, and it's like, even if it's provoked, I would say, even if something was stolen, like a car was stolen, there is reciprocity, there is legal and illegal means, and there is you can't try to kill somebody for that has possibly stolen your property. It becomes a court case, and if it's not a court case and it escalates straight up to murderous violence and eviction, I'm against that. And then you switch to another argument, which is there is a certain amount of killing of Palestinians going on the West Bank. I don't know who they are, but from what I hear, it is there are Hamas operatives and there are people that support that group that are being wiped out in the West Bank as well. And so which one of these narratives is true, I have no access to. But I'm not going to match your assumption that these are innocent people.
We have access, though. We have access, and you don't want to believe it. I have family on the ground right now in Tulkarem, on our land, telling us they're afraid to leave their home. Electricity being cut off by the government in Israel. There is no government or no judicial branch in the West Bank for them to even complain about. 99.7% conviction rate, and you want them to go to the courts? What world are you living here, Kashmir? And also, you have to look at it from that perspective. What are the facts on the ground? Have you been to the West Bank? Have you been to Gaza? Have you been to Israel? Have you seen everything?
Oh, I can't go to those because I'll get killed.
No, that's not true.
You wouldn't if you came with me. That's not true.
We didn't kill Adar.
Jewish friends to Ramallah. I'll take Adar. I'll take Tal. I'll bring them.
Me and Adar were in Ramallah.
Yeah, we didn't kill Adar or Tal.
Ramallah, and then
this is fear-based, and I would recommend to you, and I give you an open invite, Kashmir. If you ever want to come to Ramallah or come to Tulkarem, where my family's from, in that area, I promise you will be safe.
And let me tell you something.
I stepped in there at one point during my life.
We do need a,
but not recently, and I won't go.
I think that we went to Ramallah. Obviously, we weren't speaking Hebrew. We felt safe. There are places in the West Bank where you shouldn't go. There's a high chance of being killed. We just need to be honest about that. But I think it's not to the extent that many people believe. And I'll just give you guys an anecdote. Many of you know this, but 2016, me and a few friends did the social experiment where I blindfolded myself in East Jerusalem with the sign, "I'm a Jew and I love you. If you love me back, give me a hug." When I told a few friends that I'm going to do this, they're like, "Bro, you're going to die. Don't do it. You're going to die." And surely enough, I got hugs and it went viral and it was this whole thing. Now, again, there are places where I could not do that, where I very well may have died. But there's definitely places, Palestinian villages.
Well, the same thing with the Palestinians can't go either, right? Like my cousin and I got lost in the desert, and we were trying to get back from Jerusalem, and we ended up right in front of a settlement, in front of guys with a bunch of machine guns. Probably not safe for us to be there either, right? So I mean, it kind of is hand in hand. There are certain places in Los Angeles that are not safe. I wouldn't go down to South Central at midnight, right?
The Tel Aviv Delphinarium was not safe. For my friends that died in a fire there, who were teenagers who were just finishing high school, and then a man walked in with an explosive device and blew them to smithereens, and now all I have of them is photos. That was not safe. Dizenhof was not safe in the middle of the peace process in '95, when the bus that I was taking to high school blew up twice. Just I didn't happen to be on it that day because I showed up on time. And terrorists don't wake up before 9 o'clock.
I don't think that these contradict one another, of Sam or his friends not feeling safe, or you not feeling safe in certain areas. You know, I was in Tel Aviv during the Dizengoff terror attack 2 years ago during my engagement. Like we had to run away from the area. It doesn't mean that that takes away from Justin's friends' feelings of being uneasy when they're around soldiers. Because for many Palestinians who are living in the West Bank who aren't a part of these militant groups, and I personally am very much a follower of Palestinian militancy in the West Bank, and I know exactly what's going on there in terms of their activities, but a lot of them are just normal people just trying to get by. And when you live, like, for example, I very much always feel different whenever I go into the West Bank. It always looks very, very different, like constantly seeing watchtowers, constantly seeing soldiers. You don't feel like you're in Israel anymore. You feel like you're in a very, very different place, unless you're on the specific roads where you never even have to see any of these other areas. And it is dangerous. It can be dangerous. I went to Ramallah once. Would I do it again at the moment? No, because of tensions being much, much higher. But I would also probably feel the same. For example, there's most likely Arab friends of mine who they wouldn't go to certain areas because they know that tensions are very high and that they're going to be looked at as a suspect. I can promise you, for example, knowing from as a security guard who is at a university, that most of the guards, if you were an Arab, they'd be a lot more cautious about you than if you were a Jew. And so you could say yes. So you could say that because of precedent and stuff like that. But that person who's innocent, who's just trying to get to class, is now potentially going to be harassed and going to be interrogated when they're completely innocent and they have no. It doesn't matter if, from my perspective, it's legitimate for me to be a. And
they're a victim. Do you know what they're a victim of? If you spend 70 years ignoring the evil part of your history completely and believing that you're only the victim, and if you also believe that you're superior, and if you also believe that despite being superior, you were betrayed, not once, but like multiple times, and every time you're betrayed, and if enough people in a society believe that, then it becomes very difficult to coexist with that society.
Wait.
And the generalization becomes
the victim mentality is who's crying victim mentality here?
Everything you just said, I agree is true about Palestinians, but also Jews.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, I think he was talking about Jews in this instance.
No,
right? Were you talking about Palestinians? But your mentality that we get betrayed, we get backstabbed, we get turned against. This is kind of victimization, if you ask me. I think you kind of described the Israeli society's mentality.
Yes, I'm describing the society.
You guys didn't want to Gaza. We pulled out of Gaza.
One at a time.
Yeah, but Casimir, no, I mean, because here's the thing, Casimir, you're sitting here arguing like, okay, we gave you guys a state in Gaza, which I would never in my life call state, but
that's not my argument.
Okay, we gave you guys a chance in Camp David, and you guys backed it out. We gave you this and this second intifada.
I'm not subscribing to any of these arguments. You're assuming.
So what's the back? How did we backstab you? How did we backstab you? I'm just curious. Or betray you?
No, I'm not. Okay, I was speaking about Arabs. I'm willing to admit that among Jews, there are similar feelings where, for example, they don't recognize the parts of the Nakba which were aggressive. There were probably, out of the hundreds of villages, at least one that was attacked despite not carrying out any attacks from that village at all. So those
400
parts of the dark history of the foundation of Israel deserve to be recognized, right? I am not against that, but I'm not against the state as a solution. However, I do recognize we're sort of like trapped above the volcano. all of those evil guard towers, there are, when I see a police officer in New York or wherever I go, that police officer makes me nervous. And I would not want there to be state security around me. I would want there to be private security so that they have accountability. I'm very cautious around a man that can use his gun and be protected by an entire regime with qualified immunity and other nonsense that's built on top of it, right? That's natural. However, I also recognize that when we defund the police without allowing private security to take over, what we get is not peace and coexistence, but store in the most civilized part of our country, stores are getting openly looted, and people can't hold on to their households, and invasions of households become more common because you abolished the police. Now, I want to abolish the police, but not immediately, and not without replacing it with private security. So I recognize that we're living somehow like above a volcano, we're trapped, and if we just release all the chains all at once, we'll fall down into the lava. Very bad. Similarly, I recognize that if Israel ceases to be a state tomorrow, the day after it will be, and all the soldiers, everybody retreats, the day after it will be attacked, and the day after it will reform basically what you see right now, more or less. This is why the right-wingers in Israel keep winning elections, because every time that society relaxes and stops generalizing like in the 90s, the response is that they get punched in the face. And why do they get punched in the face? Why do people suffer? Because the other side does not recognize their part in the history. And I can see that through the media. I can see that nobody knows about the history of the city of Tzfat. Never mentioned on any channel. Nobody shows the property maps. Nobody shows that these were territories that were not one people trying to invade another, but that there were empty land and people were moving in to live side by side on territory that was either sold to them or given to them. That's the generality. And the people that were selling them, at the time, they were called traitors. Why? Because people in general have a blood and soil conception of territory. They believe that.
Are you referring to the Jezreel Valley, for example? Is that the areas you're? Because that was not even sold by local people.
It wasn't sold by local people because when the Ottoman Empire started trying to label territory, a lot of people that were buying it were outside of the country, but they were buying empty land, and then people were moving into lands without recognizing who owns it. And then a few decades later, they were moved out of it. That's the generality. In the cases where somebody was even there. But in many cases, a village would sell land without getting reduced.
I think we need to move it because the purpose of today was supposed to be the live updates. And I think that we're kind of being dragged to the history and rethinking history. So
let me finish with one question for you.
Sure.
So
who's your question for?
Just the panel. I can leave and you can discuss it. So if you want to analyze a conflict, let's say you have a concept of a civilian. This is somebody who doesn't participate. And when you say a civilian death, I hope you mean not somebody in plain clothes, but somebody who's actually non-involved, who gets killed as a result. That's what we call it, civilian casualty in the war, right? Somebody who doesn't contribute in any way to the military, and then he gets killed, that's civilian. Now, here's a question, now that we have that concept. Imagine that there is a building, and out of the building, there's a mortar team that's firing mortars towards your village. And you see, mortars falling next to your home. And you have a howitzer. You can shoot back at that home, at that village that's, somebody from there is firing at you. And you have this choice, this, trolley problem. You can hit the button and fire a projectile and the mortar team is dead, but also you're guaranteed to kill civilians. Or you can wait until the mortar falls on you and your family. What will you do? What's moral?
Does it? Anybody want to take that?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. That type of question is rather loaded, and I see where you're coming with that. But let me turn it around and ask you the question. If 3 settlers are known to come out and attack Palestinian villages on a weekly basis, and we know that they are from that settlement, and we need to neutralize them, and we're going to hit a settlement and possibly kill maybe 7-10 civilians who had nothing to do with it, is that all right in your opinion? Can I attack? Can a Palestinian shoot a missile or a targeted weapon and get those 3 Jewish terrorists and take out maybe a building of civilians? Your answer might be yes. To tell you the truth, I would have to think about it.
If
but
they
if
know that there is going to be an imminent attack,
okay,
like a mortar team manned by Jewish settlers, and those Jewish settlers surround themselves by 1 million innocent children, and your family is in the crosshairs,
they do. The settlements, the settlers, where do they live?
What happens
it is the case
because of.
So I'm asking you. You mentioned you asked a very difficult question, and I'm telling you, you cannot get a straight answer. The situation is a lot more complicated than to lay it out so clear. And I'm telling you in the same manner is that we have a crisis. And in a crisis, and in the same, and I'm throwing it to you, the people who attacked Samstown and Tulkarm burned down 20 houses and 60 cars. People, I don't think anyone died, thankfully, but a lot of people were hurt. There were people trapped in their homes. But the thing, now we know where those settlers came from. They came from the nearby settlement of, was it Ofra? I think it was not Ofra. What was the name of that settlement? Shiloh, maybe Shiloh. Okay, we know where they came from.
What was my answer to you just now?
But do we have the right to attack that settlement, knowing that there's civilians there, and neutralize them?
The right to target people who commit aggression, who are in the process of it.
Then you just answered your question. If we do have the right, then you have the right.
Correctly. However, you don't have the right to target civilians. And what we see overwhelmingly is the argument from the Arab side, from the Gazan side in particular, is that when they go out and they kill, people who are peace activists, people who live in villages that were never, supporting the war.
But you're assuming that every target of the IDF has been military. Okay, UN hospitals, Shifa hospitals have not been. Those are not.
But Shifa was a military target.
Come on, Shifa was a military target. Come on.
As recognized by people in prior wars outside of Israel, even people like Amnesty International, who are highly against Israel, in prior wars, they recognized that Shifa was actively used as a military base. But I don't care about international law. If it is active, if there is a terrorist in there and he's about to launch a missile out of Shifa Hospital, then I'm sorry for everybody in that hospital.
Casimir,
you have to have some standard that is actually a standard.
Casimir, if I may. So it's often, as the question, as it was asked, it's often said, yeah, look, this is collateral damage. If a mortar is being shot or a rocket is being shot from a civilian area, does Israel have the right to respond? According to international law, they do. But to what extent can you kill civilians as a result of collateral damage and it's still being okay? Let's just take an extreme hypothetical.
Yes.
Let's say Israel were to decide, you know what? Our intention is not to kill civilians; it's to destroy Hamas. But the fastest way to do that is to nuke Gaza. We're not trying to kill civilians. We just want to kill Hamas, and this is the easiest way to do that. Is that then okay? Because you could use this.
I'll tell you why it's not okay. Because one of the tests you have to apply, if it is the only way, if the only way to defend yourself is to click a button where the entire planet goes poof, then in terms of there's a legal argument where you don't deserve to sacrifice yourself for anyone else. Morally, you would say, oh, the consequences of this would be so horrid, I shouldn't do it. And then morally, you would surrender. But I would understand your right to self-defense in the middle of an attack when it's your only option. Now, this doesn't work for the state of Israel because they have other options. They have precision munitions. Therefore, if you have a precision munition, if you have a munition that can hit a terrorist as he fires it, or like a combatant, as he fires at you, right? Or right the moment before, then you should do it. Similarly, you can analogize it to, a gunfight. At which moment can you shoot at somebody? And what weapon can you use? If you have a handgun and your enemy is like another cowboy with a handgun, and he just said, I'm going to shoot you, you can shoot him right there with a handgun.
So do you actually...
You can't use a tank and blow up the entire neighborhood because you have other means that are immediately available.
So do you actually believe that everything Israel has done in Gaza is because that is the only... I think
they're performing crimes in Gaza. I think that Israeli military is definitely performing military crimes in Gaza and crimes of libertarian law in Gaza. But one of the tragedies of this whole thing is that there is no libertarian argument from the other side. There's
Well,
no like
because-
people in Gaza who say, "Oh, we're libertarian and we
Casimir,
will
why are
admit
you-
to all of these rights and we will behave like libertarians."
Wait,
These are two statists fighting each other.
why? But yeah, I'm trying to understand why you keep mentioning libertarianism when most people aren't libertarians. It's almost like it's not even relevant when it's
Because
not.
most people
Bit of
don't
a red
have a
herring.
standard to oppose aggression. And because of that, it leads to inconsistency. It leads to Schmittian friend enemy, which I'll explain it to you. I mentioned twice. It's a very simple concept. To my enemy, the law. To my friend, everything, or the other way around. To my friend, everything. To my enemy, the law. The enemy has to behave according to laws. My friends can do whatever they want because they're the victims. This was used first by the Germans.
Right, you're
And
describing.
it's used by everyone, including the Israeli military. It's used the same way. It is like, the other side should obey the law, but we are going to protect our friendly soldiers and give them qualified immunity, right? That's just the way things are done.
Yeah, so
you can escape that
pointing
is
out
to
that-
say, I assert libertarianism, where every individual has the right to life, to their property, to themselves, and if they purchase land, you cannot dislodge them in any manner unless they attack you first.
So it's essentially just acknowledging that people have some kind of cognitive bias. Yeah. I mean, a clear example of when Israel does it, for example, if when a soldier is attacked, an IDF soldier is attacked, that's called terrorism, right? Like that's defined by Israel as terrorism. So that's like a clear example where they'll define anything as terrorism, but Israel attacking Hamas, that's obviously just war and perfectly legitimate. So that's like one clear example. But I still don't understand like why the libertarian angle, because people, I think it's cool to call out people's inconsistency and try to have them have like a more consistent worldview. But why does that necessarily need to relate to the concept of a no state or small state?
Because what you have is a conflict between states, between people that generalize. They generalize and they collectivize guilt. The entire language is, what do the Israelis do? What do the Gazans do? We all do this. Like, I'm not excluded from this, right? But the only way out of the conflict is to stop doing this and to teach people objective history as close to it as we can get, with all the crimes, and be open about the crimes of your side,
Casimir,
of your
and
generalization.
that's what we're trying to do here, by the way.
You don't
That's what
appeal
we're
to
trying to do here.
international law.
And I think that's
You
what
don't
everybody on
appeal
this
to
panel has been
law,
trying to do.
the law of non-aggression. If you can start doing that, you have a way out of this tunnel. If you don't have the grounds to stand on and claim, oh, I shouldn't be, this shouldn't happen. You notice you always appeal to some outside observer. You appeal to international law, but who is the international law composed of? Of criminals that do whatever they want when they have the power to do so. Tell me,
On this point, I don't disagree with you.
I was actually going to say that's probably the only thing he said that makes sense, because
Joan Donahue, right, for instance, who's the head of the ICJ, is a former official of the U.S. State Department.
Yes.
So we know even everything goes well at the ICJ, right? Everything goes exactly the way the Palestinians want it, and more than likely, it's going to get blocked in the end by the head of the ICJ, right?
Yes.
So when you talk about international law and you talk about all these different things, it doesn't really matter in my opinion.
And not just that, but this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, and I kind of agree with him on that point. That international law doesn't mean shit, okay? Because first of all, it's implemented by those who are in power. It's only useful for them. And this is why I said that I'm not so focused on the ICC, because I really don't have hope in them, because I know something's going to happen. Some I don't know, Palestinian official will be bribed and drop the case, or something will happen. But here's what I want to say to Casimir. Casimir, in the situation that we're in right now, yes, ICG. Did I say something different? Okay.
ICC. Yeah.
Did I say ICC? Yeah, you're right. Okay, ICG. Sorry. Anyways, I had a long night. Anyways, so what I'm saying is that you're saying that each side has to kind of like look and see its narrative and its perspective and what they do wrong and stuff. From an Israeli point, you have the luxury to do that. You see, Israeli society hasn't. I was talking to someone today. Israeli society during this war, think about it. It's quite remarkable. The shekel is pretty steady. It's about 3.6 to the dollar still. It was about 3.7.
It's 4 now, no?
Okay, but it's been pretty consistent. Mm-hmm. Gasoline prices in Israel. Tal, are you a driver? How's the prices of gas? Is it pretty stable?
Yeah, hasn't really changed.
Okay. Have you go to the grocery store? Do you see things missing off the shelf like bread and I don't know?
Only in the first 2 weeks.
Okay, but pretty much life in general is pretty normal, other than the reservists. You know, I know there's a labor shortage because a lot of people are in the reserve and stuff. So what I'm trying to say is, it's sort of, you know, we can say, okay, let's reflect on our society, but now turn it on the Palestinians. Now, I spoke to a friend of mine in Hebron who had to go to Bethlehem, which usually takes about 25 minutes. Took them 4 hours. So life, and now you have areas in the West Bank, and I'm not even talking about Gaza, where you have grocery stores that are, because they're not able to get supplies because roads are closed and things like that. So to say, hey, let's stop and let's reflect on our faults and stuff like that, while 25,000 Palestinians were killed in the last 4 months, while we were constantly under attack and maybe even possibly facing expulsion from the country, crazy stuff going in the West Bank. And I should mention to our brothers and sisters in the 48 territories, who we're reading that are actually, rethinking their identity as Israelis rather than Palestinians, which is extreme bullshit, because 2,000 of them have been thrown in jail in the last 3 months because of just tweeting simple things or supporting Palestinians in Gaza. Our Palestinian brothers and sisters support us in the 48. They are with us and they support us. And trust me, there is some, of course, maybe they have different views, but some of them, they're scared, terrified, because they know that this will come to them too. Because Israel, what they're doing in the West Bank, what they're doing in Gaza, it'll eventually reach to them, because this is the intention that's been made by your elected people, your Knesset people that scream in your chambers of power, what they want to do. So to say, let's reflect, you can't say it to Palestinians, reflect on yourselves, reflect on your faults, because right now they're dying, we're dying. You can't ask this.
Right now, it's the best moment to reflect, is to say, listen, what we've been doing is fundamentally wrong. What can we do? What can we do differently? How can we think differently? One of the ways, if you want to, this is like a segue, maybe we should open a conversation about it, a separate one. Here's a topic for a conversation.
Yeah, just real quick, Casimir, just because Sam and Tal both need to hop off, so I do want to give them an opportunity to share some final thoughts before hopping off, and then we'll keep the stream going for maybe another 20 minutes.
I'll just quickly go first. Two things. One is just regard to, it was something that Casimir said right at the beginning regarding how, not looking at what's going on with Libya or Syria with other countries, is that at least us, I don't know your background yet, but Sam, Justin, and Adar, and myself are all either Palestinians or Israelis. This conflict affects us daily. I don't care what's happening in terms of what's happening around the world, because of course it matters in the grand scheme of things, but at the end of the day, I talk about this conflict because this is what matters to me, because this is what affects my life on a daily basis and what affects them and their families and their loved ones. And so I think that the what about is not really relevant, especially to this type of live stream, because this specific live stream involves everyone who is actually actively involved in this conflict in terms of actually being, it's not like you have a group of people from New Zealand who are suddenly talking about this, and you can ask, why specifically does this conflict matter to you? Why are you focused on this? But specifically to this panel, I thought it was a very strange thing to say, because everyone on this panel is affected by this personally.
It was a response to international law, just as an answer.
It's not relevant to this conversation, because to us it is, it does matter how we look at it. And just regarding misinformation or how we think, just make sure that what you're looking online, I've already seen a few comments that were kind of like feeding off of things that I personally have analyzed and debunked online, is that, of course, in the grand scheme of things, you can talk about the fact that, what does it matter debunking these small little things? Because the grand scheme of things, a lot of people are dying. But it's important that our opinions and the way that we view the world is built up on facts and factual statements and data, just as Sam talked about the importance of data earlier on. And so make sure, try to double look at what you're actually looking up online, and try to understand that what you're viewing is real and coming from, I wouldn't even say from a verified source, coming from enough sources and enough verification along the way from multiple different avenues to make sure that you're actually building it on a concise platform. Thank you very much, Sam. And Sam, I didn't really get to speak to you much, but I'd love for you to be on again and have a conversation with you. Justin, good to see you again, and nice to meet you.
Thank you, Sal. Thank you, Sal.
And
nice to see you.
Adar, enjoy being out of the country.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tal. Always a pleasure.
I'll see you guys.
Sam, yeah. So
yeah. Well, I mean, just as closing remarks, as I also have to get my day going. Listen, I believe that you always have to take nuance into consideration. Two opposing ideas can be equally true at the same time. And so, well, you can disagree with that all you want, but that's exactly this conflict. That's exactly how a lot of people on both sides look at this conflict, that they believe that they're right, that they believe they're on the right side of history, right? So you can't say that that's not being said on either side. That is being said on either side. And so as someone who has lived this conflict for over 4 decades, personally, in first person, as well as, looked at the history extensively, I would say to you that, if you're going to speak about the history, then educate yourself on Herbert Samuel's Kashmir. Educate yourself on the British Mandate and all these elements.
And even early Zionist writing in the 1890s, which was clearly behind about how to evacuate the native population. It was clear from the beginning.
And I would like to just end, at the end of the day, my purpose is a nonviolent movement in the vein of Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela. All of those scenarios, every single one of them succeeded because of the way that they went about it. And you can shake your head all they want, but they did succeed. So the proof is in the pudding when it comes to those types of conflicts. Now, I don't have much more to say on that. Obviously, I do have to go, but I do thank everyone for their time, and I hope to do this again soon. Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Sam. Nice to meet you. I hope we can be in touch. I wrote you a little message in the private chat.
I'll connect you guys.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Connect you guys, and Sam, thank you. I'd love to have you back on soon, and we will update you all on the advocacy project we're starting out here. So
awesome.
Awesome. Cool. We are now going to bring Abraxo on. Abraxo, I believe this is your first time joining us, correct?
Yes, it's my first time. Do you hear me?
Welcome. Yeah, loud and clear. Welcome. To introduce yourself, let us know what's on your mind.
Hi, so my name is Bilal. I am half Egyptian, half Moroccan. So this conflict, in some sense, does not concern me the same way that it concerns you guys in a direct manner. But I think of myself as someone who is very involved with this conflict. And I think I've been watching your channel for a few years now. So I've been following the debates, the discussions, and I really appreciate what you're doing on this channel. So
thank you, man.
I just wanted to hop on.
It's good to finally have you on after a few years of just watching. So welcome.
Thank you.
Is there something specific you want to share? Or you just want to you'll chime in when.
I think there were some things that I wanted to share in some sense that I think in some sense this channel is trying to do that. I think the most important part in conflict resolution, and maybe this is me extrapolating from my how do you say this? We call it couples therapy. Is in couples therapy, there's a lot that goes into conflict resolution. So something like validating, for example, validating the other side despite disagreeing, acknowledging the other person's pain. And these are things that I see are very often missing from the dialogue. It's very quickly becomes very defensive. It becomes that people are unwilling to recognize the other person's pain because it concerns you. It goes to something that might be inconvenient for you, for your side, and I think that's one thing that I find missing sometimes from these conversations. So one of those things is like you guys were having a discussion about the history, about the purchases, for example. And there seems to be, from my vantage point, there seems to be a lack of willingness to put aside the legal element in some sense, and just look at the human element. If I am someone who's a farmer, who has an absentee landlord, who sells off the property that I live on, and then you have these European Jews that move in, that then kick you out of this place because they are like, okay, this is no longer somewhere where you're allowed to live. We have purchased this land, and we have purchased this land from these landowners, and we are also no longer going to make any Arabs work here. I feel like that's something that we have real historical tangible facts for, but there seems to be a lack of willingness to acknowledge, for example, this kind of pain, to just look at the human element of like, okay, what would it be like for me if I were in those farmers' shoes, that I was living here for generations upon generations, and then you have not only people coming here that no longer have an interest in sharing this land with you, they want to actively kick you out of that land, and then the disputes start to happen. So, for example, I'm talking now about Petah Tikva. I don't know if you know this. I think
Yes.
it was a settlement. So in Petah Tikva, this was in the first wave of the Aliyah, the first Aliyah. And you had Jews coming to Petah Tikva, and there were Arabs living there, and the land was sold to Jewish settlers from Europe. That afterwards they kept the people working on that land, because this was an Ottoman custom. If property goes from one person to another, you still keep the farmers on the land, and you let them graze the land and graze the animals. But there were a few people who came from the Pale of Settlement, from Białystok. This is like I think in Poland in 1881, and they fervently moved to displace the Arab farmers that were on that land. And this is known as the first what do you call it? The first fight between Arabs and Jews that occurred from the first Aliyah, the first fight that happened. The Arabs were unwilling to move, so I think one of the Jews took one of their donkeys. Then the Arabs came back and they stole not just the donkeys; they stole more animals from them. And then I have the document here. If
I do. We spent all too much time of this episode talking about history, so I do want to move to to more current matters. But thank you for sharing that, Casimir. I wanted to share a different perspective, because I noticed when Sam was talking about that there's two truths. You rejected that idea, and I very much agree that there is one objective truth. But I think that a lot of it has to do with what one's perspective is. So, for example, if I were to hold a quarter, right, people standing behind me would see tails, people in front of me would see heads. They're seeing something very different. And it's not that they're lying. They just have half of the truth, or they're putting an emphasis on one portion of the truth, whether it's the truth that they were taught growing up, or it's a truth that just reconfirms their existing belief. That's generally how we go about things. So I agree that there's one objective truth, but I think both sides can have contradictory truths, because they're focusing on different aspects that are more relevant to their narrative and their story.
What you said is very nuanced, and I totally agree with it. And if this is what he was going to say, I would not be like putting up a show of rejecting.
I think that's what he meant, but yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think that he used words that are specifically used by a type of Hegelian idea that truth is a synthesis of opposing ideas. You can synthesize, the opposites and somehow come out at another, truth, and then it gets synthesized again.
I don't think I got that impression.
Well, he's not here to defend himself, but all good. So,
okay,
but let me, can I, because I think as a Palestinian, I think I can kind of share solidarity with what he said. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, that there is definitely need to rethink. And now, like when he said, following peaceful things like Martin Luther King's and stuff like that, these are concepts that Adar, you've said many times, we need that in the Palestinian community. And I agree that the Palestinian community we need recovery. Both sides, first of all, need recovery. Jews need it and Palestinians need it, especially Palestinians need it. But it's not about what we need to do. It's about what we need to do to get to start needing to do what we need to do. And unfortunately, this is the bypass that like I said, I've been an activist for I don't know how many years now, like decades. Okay. And it's like this, and what you said that the foolishness of the 1990s, I think you used the word foolishness, that you said Israelis were foolish in 1990s to accept the concept of peace or two states or something like that, is that this bypass, you can't, like I've worked with Israeli Palestinian groups, and even with this organizations, I had a fallout with many people, because you see, this is my principle. We cannot humanize each other. We cannot talk about and have these great discussions and be friends without practical things on the ground that are changing the day-to-day lives, because it took an incident like October 7th on the Jewish side, the slaughter in Gaza on the Palestinian side, that all the hard work that people like Adar do, people like me do, like, I lost out of touch with a lot of my Israeli friends who, they said, what, we give up. And Palestinians have also said, what, F this, we don't want this anymore. And that's what I'm saying, is that all this humanization and all this talks, it's not going to go anywhere unless we solve the immediate thing, which is the war, the occupation, and the killing. And it takes risk. Israelis have to take that risk, and Palestinians also have to take that risk. But you're saying
they don't have to take that risk. In fact, in history, the people who take risks get exterminated as a people.
Yeah,
and
but
people who choose the safest path are normally saved.
But Israel is in a position right now so militarily superior. I mean,
that historically, they should explore what they should really do historically. I'm not saying that it's the right or moral thing to do. The immoral thing to do, but the opportunist thing to do would be to use their history to solve quote unquote.
Well, I would agree with you, but I would agree with you. Let's use
exactly
history.
What Arabs
Let's use history.
For centuries.
What's going on right now? What's going on right now in Gaza is the fifth war in the last 15 years. Has it solved the problem? So if you want to use history, let's use history.
Why it hasn't solved
the war and the occupation has not brought Israel any closer to security or peace.
You've never experienced total war. The total war is Dresden. Now, Americans know what is total war. It means dropping a nuke on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, making sure you pick the cities where the most people will get incinerated, so that there is going to be people that have a god emperor on the throne in Japan. This is highly immoral. This was mass murder. This was genocide committed by the American government, right? So you understand, I'm not excusing it in any way. I'm just saying it is stupid to not recognize it as extremely effective.
Yeah, but you're taking it.
Millions of Japanese lives where they believe that the emperor can protect them.
The current crisis, what the current crisis is doing right now is that
one at a time. Casimir, wrap up, and then Justin will go.
I'll wrap it up. It was extremely effective against the Japanese to flip a switch and to change them from highly aggressive nation of conquerors to a nation that recognizes that it has been conquered for the first time in its history, and there's no turning back. Now, this was done using a criminal means, and America and other countries.
Okay, when
Germans lost, the simplest solution is the least moral solution, right?
Yeah,
But
on the other hand, what was it followed by? What was it?
I'll give you one last one, and then you can speak. The ethnic cleansing of Germans out of Eastern Europe, where 12 million ethnic Germans were uprooted, including very peaceful people, moved out of the areas and moved back into Germany. That ethnic cleansing has prevented future ethnic strife between Germans and non-Germans in those areas. It prevented a whole bunch of retaliation from Poles who suffered under Germans, and counter retaliations from new, fresh, young Germans who would see their family die to counter retaliation. Right? It solved the problem. Now, if Israel was opportunist, it would solve the problem, quote unquote, by doing a genocide. But that's not what they're going to do, because since forever, they have a society that has standards, that has universal morals. And so despite a few of them saying, the awful thing out loud, none of them are actually willing to do it. The soldiers on the ground are not willing to do it. That's why you're saved. That's why there's a conversation and there's a chance.
Thank you. Guys, we are going to wrap it up in a few minutes. We're going to maybe take 2 audience questions, then everyone can share some final thoughts.
Sure.
I was just going to say, just
real quick, we will prioritize super chats. So if anybody wants to support the show and everything we do, you give a super chat. You can also become a patron or a member here on YouTube. The idea is once we have enough paid members, we will hire somebody full time, hopefully, so we could just do a lot more of this content. Pre-recorded video. Like our idea really is to expand, so we could do multiple streams a week and really, foster greater understanding and connection between people in conflict, Israelis and Palestinians, and beyond. So all support is very much appreciated. And yeah, so Justin, share.
Yeah, I was going to say that, am I pronouncing your name right? Casimir, right? Casimir? What he was saying, you mentioned like Japan, and you mentioned these historical examples, but remember that it wasn't war that brought peace to Japan. It wasn't war. Maybe that was the catalyst that brought it, but later there was something called the Marshall Plan. Later, there was something where Japan was reinvented and supported to become the nation that it is today. Like, look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan was destroyed by war. The United States destroyed it and stuff. And rather than invent some kind of Marshall Plan, they spent the same, probably more money than they did what they did on the Marshall Plan to basically build a military to seize power, and a military which collapsed within a matter of days when the United States pulled out. So you may be onto something that this is what it took to bring it. But the thing is that I think it's very short-sighted what you're talking about, because you see these wars are being done, but nothing has been coming at the end of it. And the thing is, it's short-sighted because you may succeed. You may succeed. Palestinians may be removed. I'm to the conclusion right now that we might actually, the majority of our people may actually be removed from our land.
That.
I'm not saying you do, but I'm just saying it's possible. It's a quite possibility. I think that the whole world has proved that they will stand by if Palestinians are forced to be removed. But here's the thing. Do you think it's going to be over for Israel if all the Palestinians are removed from Palestine? Do you think it's going to be over? There are over 2 billion Muslims. Maybe they can't do nothing right now, but what about 100 years from now? What about 200 years from now? So I don't know these wars and stuff. Where are you going to take it to? What level are you guys going to take it to?
Depends on how the Jews behave. If they engage in trade, then all past atrocities will be very quickly forgotten. Unfortunately,
I'm just saying,
that's the reality of
that's
the reality of watching history in the past. It is trade. It is trade. And
I don't think after ethnically cleansing and after doing what you're going to do to Palestinians that there will ever be peace fully.
You see, you always generalize.
I tend to agree with us. I think generally speaking, if the world will forgive and move on. People are self-interested. Even right now, the Middle Eastern countries.
I think people in power who will, Adar, but I think the general population will not. Palestine, the land of Palestine, touches on not just the Palestinian issue.
A generation passes, and it's not like the people have so much power to do something about it, right? Like Saudi Arabia normalizing ties with Israel. It's not like Saudi Arabians support it, but what are they going to do about it? So at the end of the day, nations are self-interested. They're going to do what's in their best interest, and best interest.
But these are authoritarian states. Normalization in Saudi Arabia among the population is extremely low. It's extremely low. But
let's go back to Japan.
Yeah,
can I just
thought, but I don't think it's really so relevant. Israelis and Palestinians, or Jews and Palestinians, are staying on the land. We need to find a solution.
But this was the same mistake that was made in Black September, and it's the same mistake that was made in the Abraham Accords. And one thing about October 7th and the events that's coming afterwards is that it shows that Israel, as much as they've been trying to do in the last few decades to bypass Palestinians, to get incorporated to the region, they may have succeeded, but in the end, it's not. There is no future for Israel in the Middle East without reconciling its problems with the Palestinians. And this is something, yes.
One moment.
Wait, let Black
September. Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Are the Hashemites not still in power in Jordan? Is Jordan not a quiet country now after Black September? How can you call that not effective? You can call it immoral and barbarous.
Yeah, but it is in power. But Jordan realized that the Palestinians. Do you have to understand that the Palestinian Liberation Organization after Black September, even though it was a military defeat, it was a political victory because it established that the Palestinians would be in control of the Palestinian issue.
It established that they were driven out of Jordan, and Jordan has not had any major assassinations of its leaders since then. Attempts. It worked
but again,
it
removed
hey,
Jordan. It
You
removed
took-
Jordan as
listen,
as
they
the
took
sovereign
innocent people.
sovereign person that's over its desire for sovereignty over the Palestinian areas and the Palestinian issue.
So what? It removed. They took a whole bunch of people who lived for probably a long while, who libertarian homesteaded their property, and they told them, listen, because enough of you are
The L word
participating in
again.
this violent movement that is targeting our king, this kingdom is going to evict all of you, including the innocents. They did this horrible thing in Black September, and then they have a history of quiet, and all the other Arabs forgive them for it. Why? Because nobody wants to have these problems, and they're all authoritarian thugs, and that's how the world works. Now, if you want to change the world, you have to stop believing in miracles like the Marshall Plan. The reason why the Japanese managed to change is because Japanese, before the war, before the militarists were in power, did a lot of things in the world that were productive. For example, you can look at the history. Open up the book of the history of the Toyota car factory family. The elder established the Toyota Milk Company that invested a lot of money into industrializing China before China was even invaded by Japan. So there are a lot of industrious people in Japan that, when they're given the freedom to produce and to trade, they manage to be very effective at it, and they quickly gain wealth and prosperity for themselves by producing actual goods and trading them with the world. And they suddenly realize we don't need an empire to do so, because free trade actually gives us all the influence that we need. We can just go to America and purchase a car company. We don't need to invade America to sell cars to Americans, right? They're right here. Everybody's driving Toyota Camrys. And Japan, made in Japan in the 90s, has been like a golden standard for quality. That's why they're rich, not because some government gave them money. In fact, the Marshall Plan and the government involvement, both theirs with the conquests, stunted them. They had they were climbing up, and then the wars brought them down, and then they were started climbing again. That's the narrative of history. People, when economically they become self-responsible, they grow. When money is showered on top of them and money is given to them by welfare, that's means of enslavement. It applies in America as well. There are groups in America who were given so much welfare between the 60s and the 80s that their single fatherhood increased. All of the factors of poverty increased in them. And in the 90s, when they reformed welfare, things stabilized a little bit, and they're not as bad.
Okay, I think we're drifting too far away from
It's economics. It's right on top of the money. If you want to fix the conflict, you have to fix the economics as well. Meaning, Palestinians have to trade on the world market.
We need to get this guy with Lightstone, with or on the economics, because I think that talks a lot about this.
Do you agree with me though? That's one of the ways out.
I do kind of agree with you, because I do believe in sort of liberal sort of economics. But the thing is that you have to also have fair conditions, and I just have to say to you that it's easier, as someone who with family and business in the West Bank. It's not easy. It's not easy because of the barriers. The trade is not easy. Exchange of products is not easy because of for example, it's easier to get it's easier to get like UNICEF or like Save the Children to go put money into like what you called welfare programs that make people slaves. But to go and open a business, to bring, like we have a lot of people in the Palestinian community who are in Latin America and the United States that are wealthy. The Gulf, for example, what's going on in Rawabi, which is a Palestinian city that was built. The obstacles that he had to face to build that city, to invest in it, a normal investor would have just walked away. They would have said, this is ridiculous. So, yeah, those, and I think you can look at people like Sam Bahour, who's a Palestinian that lives in Ramallah. He talks a lot about this, and he has a counterpart. I can't remember his name, an Israeli counterpart. So those environments don't exist. And the reason why they don't exist, again, it goes back to my issue, the occupation and the militarism. It's blocking this development. And this development is essential to basically calm the situation now, so that we don't have the killing that's happening right now and the murder that's happening right now. And that we can...
Justin, just one straight question.
We're going to...
If you can ask him...
You could respond, but you could respond, but this will be your final thought, and then everyone else will get an opportunity, and we're going to wrap it up. Cool.
Justin, just a quick question I want you to answer.
Sure.
If you were to flip a switch and the occupation disappear, tell me, is the power structure in the West Bank would also disappear? Or do you still have the responsibility, like the American founding fathers did, like people in Russia did in other places,
Mhm.
for better or worse, to have a revolution that in the end of it, there is less centralization of power. You have to revolutionize people's mindsets about power. You have to
Yes.
revolutionize how they think about economics. And without doing that, they will always have an occupier, because they will always believe that somebody has to be responsible for them, and they won't engage in trade to obtain wealth. They will want welfare, and they will be conquered, voluntarily by submitting to a government. So if you don't change that, how, the occupation provides a very neat excuse, but when it's been removed, like in Gaza, it was removed momentarily. The response was to destroy infrastructure that was built by Jews, even though that infrastructure was directly economically useful to the Arabs. So I don't believe
I think I
that
remember
your
this
fantasy
being
will pan
debunked,
out.
actually.
That's my question. Do you believe that? Do you agree with me that it's a fantasy that just removing the occupation will solve all the problems?
I
Removing
think
the
that,
occupation is removing the boot on the neck, basically.
yeah, like for
Removing
example,
the
let's take
occupation is the first step.
yeah, and just real quick, because this would take me a long time to answer.
Well, what do we mean by occupation? Let's start
Yeah,
there.
that's what I'm saying. Like because you see, you removed the occupation from Gaza, but you put in place a siege, which was worse. I mean, Gaza, you said it had infrastructure, the airport, the port, the border control, and I can give you examples of Gaza, how tomatoes from Gaza going to Nablus, by the time they arrived, were more expensive than tomatoes coming from Italy. So again, if you want to talk about libertarian economics and free trade and stuff like that, it's always based on all being equal, but we're not equal. So you can't have that notion. And then as far as like what you said about the Palestinian Authority, you have to also take into consideration that for the Palestinian mindset to change, and I'm going to tell you something, the quick Palestinians, we are a very forgiving people, believe it or not. I know people don't want to believe that, but like, let me give you a perfect example, like the settlement attacks. I promise you, if the settlers who attack Palestinians, who cause destruction in the West Bank, were dealt with in the same manner, because we can say that the Palestinian Authority, say, for example, it wanted to be a reasonable governing authority, and it can say, we go after our extremists because they are going to disrupt the fragile society that we have. And most Palestinians who work, common Joe and Schmo, they're going to say, yes, we don't want extremists, making problems in the streets, making our situation worse. But when nothing is done, or very little is done to stop the settler violence, meanwhile, everything is being done to stop the Palestinian, it creates that the PA is not a legitimate authority, and it has no confidence in it. So Palestinians say, you know what, PA? Like Sam is from Tulkarm. Tulkarm, that city was attacked. They had no means to defend themselves. The Palestinian security forces had no means to defend themselves. But if I was to go rampage at some Jewish settlement in the West Bank, they have an army to protect them, to shoot and kill, unauthorized to do that. So if you don't have this sense of equality to dealing with criminals, then I think you're going to have a problem. And this is what's going to be the overall problem.
I'd say that's only one part of the aspect. That must be only
that's
one
going to be
part
my
of the-
final comment, Adar. So go ahead and feel to wrap it up.
Yeah, Justin, thank you so much. If you guys want, we could take this to Discord for an after party. I won't be there, but whatever. I'll share the details afterwards. Abraxa, what's up, man?
Okay, maybe I do my final thesis. I think one of the things that I think is really difficult with this conflict is that it feels a little bit like the Malcolm X quote about the knife that is stuck 9 inches in, and it's not fixed if you take it only 6 inches out. It's not even fixed if you take it all the way out. It's fixed if you heal the wound and you acknowledge that you won't even what I feel is that there's not even an acknowledgement of the knife having been put in the first place. So if you cannot even say like, oh, there's an occupation that's happening to the Palestinians, which I see is a very frequent comment that Israelis make. They say there's no occupation on Gazans, there's no occupation in the West Bank. The Palestinians have been given the ability to have a state of their own. All of these things make it seem as if the Palestinians are the ones who have been determining their own fate and have been stabbing themselves instead of what actually has been happening. And I think this is a big problem from what I see. I see it from Casimir, from what you say. This is the indication I get, basically, that you ought to acknowledge the knife that has been stuck before you can remove it and heal the wound. And this is not going to happen as long as the Palestinians. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
I agree with
this
you.
is not going to
Actually, I
happen.
just believe it's a mutual process. You can't
It is.
do it.
It is a
without-
mutual process. Sorry.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I don't think any side can unilaterally solve this. I think both sides need to do a whole lot in order to achieve a peaceful resolution. And you know, I guess this will be my final thought. We mentioned earlier, you know, both sides have this victim mentality, and potentially the worst part about victim mentality is that you then don't feel like you're responsible or have any power to do anything about it. You feel like the whole world is against you, and there will be no change until they change, until they do something different. It's really one of the most disempowering beliefs one can hold, and it's also part of my, call it my grievances with the social justice movement in its current form in the United States. And the West is very much about making victimhood be a central part of one's identity. It's like, you're disempowered, so let me further disempower you by giving you the identity of a victim rather than an identity of a human that can achieve anything they set their minds to, and just a more empowering belief system. So you know, I think our, and this is something we have in common, right? Let's talk about our commonality. We both feel like we're victims. Well, we both need to take responsibility. We both need a lot more self-reflection and introspection, and really think, what can I do? What can we do to make the situation better? How can we progress dialogue or some kind of political solution, right? Whether it's a government, whether it's like a state having this conversation or individuals having this conversation, everyone can contribute in one way or another. So I want to leave it on that. Believe in your ability to change those around you. What's the quote? One to change a few, few to change many, many to change the world. No individual can have a global impact, but you could change a few people, and that spreads. So believe in yourselves. I ended on a little David Goggins ending right there, right?
Thanks, Adar.
Cool, guys. This was great. I'm going to drop a link to the Discord. If you guys want to join the Discord on the left-hand side. It says lounge. You could have an after party and chit chat. What do we have coming up next week? I don't know, but we will have another stream. Maybe Joseph Cohen from Israel Advocacy Network is going to join. We're meant to have Zahir back on. Maybe Rami Aman, our Gazan friend. So we're working on some fun live streams. And Justin, Casimir, Abraxo, thank you all.
All right, we'll talk again soon.
Talk soon, guys. Thank you.
All right, yeah, bye-bye.